Rev up your engines!
Well, Ford halted its production of the F-150 Lightning electric pickup truck, and they've now extended their stop of production. They're having problems with the batteries, and they're saying, well, they need at least another week to make sure the batteries are made correctly. Hey, if they designed these things and built them, who knows? They already built the things that they're producing them. 1 week isn't going to fix anything. But, interestingly enough, the Ford supply chain head, who's in charge of all electric batteries and all this stuff, Annie Liu, just left Ford. And it's the usual corporate baloney. She was the director of purchasing for the Ford Model E line of all electric products and technology. And I always love the nonsense that they give. You know, somebody gets fired, but they don't get fired at that level. Listen to this. Ford spokesman T.R. Reid said, she said her plans changed, influenced by the needs of her family. Like others here, I wish her the best. The usual baloney, you know. I mean, we all know that they got rid of her, right? And then, and the needs of her family, blah, blah, blah. They always say that. They make some excuse up about why the person's leaving. Well, because obviously this whole electric line is a load of baloney. It's all nonsense, and they're getting rid of her because, well, maybe we can find somebody else to be a supply chain head who'll know what they're doing. They'll get the batteries in the right place and have it all set up and not have a shortage of parts or batteries that start on fire. That's the reason that this whole thing, they stopped building them, is because they actually had a battery start on fire while they were testing it after the vehicle was built. And of course, this is testing in the factory. It hasn't even been driven on the road yet. Wait till these things are driven on the road en masse and see the problems they'll have. And of course, the Ford spokesman, Mr. Reid, said her departure is unrelated to the recent Lightning battery issue. What do they say? If it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. Well, in this case, no, it's something else. It's a tiger or something, you know? There's never any correlation when these people leave that they screwed up with their job and they got problems. It's, their lifestyle changed. I'm sure her lifestyle changed, too. She's getting paid a lot less money than she was making there now. I just can't help but laugh about this stuff. It's just it's actually comical with the baloney they throw out to us as a public. Like, we're idiots. Oh, let's say they got a problem with the battery, and now this woman's gone who was the head of procuring the batteries and stuff. Oh, no, there's no relationship in that at all. Well, luxury EV maker Lucid seems to have a demand problem. Turns out that less and less people are reserving the new cars. You know, it means nothing. They say, oh yeah, I'd like to get one hours. It doesn't cost them any money. You know, it's just them clicking on a computer screen. They say that, well, we had 28,000 reservations last month, and in the month before they said they had 34,000. Who's to know to believe any of the stuff? The reservation system doesn't mean anything anyway. And they now say, this year, 2023, they said they're only going to build 10,000 to 14,000 of these Lucids, even though they have the factory capability of building more. Seems like something indeed is rotten in Lucid. Now, in last quarter of 2022, they delivered less than 2,000 vehicles. And they're talking about mass producing. Come on now. That's just a joke. Now, the factory is set up to build 34,000 vehicles a year. Them saying, well, we might only build 10,000 of this year says, hey, looks like people really aren't buying the things. I've only ever seen one in my entire life, and I travel all over the country. And I'm always looking for them so I can tell people. Now, since this report came up, shares of the company went down even further, dropped another 15%. You know, they're finally starting to realize a lot of this stuff is fantasy. They promise you the moon, and the closer you get to their date for promising the moon, the further away the date moves. And then to top it all off, their, in quote, reservations, a lot of them aren't even turning into actual orders. Now, during an earnings call for the stock market, which they by law have to tell the public the truth, right? Their CEO, Peter Rawlinson, reminded listeners that reservations are not binding. So even though they're having less reservations, it means nothing anyway because they're not legally binding. These aren't orders, they're reservations. And Rawlinson's solution was, and I quote, we will focus on amplifying customer awareness in 2023. Whatever that means, amplifying customer awareness of the vehicles that they're hardly building any of. Well, we got a lot of talk here, very little action. I wouldn't give much hope for Lucid in the future. Astro says, Scotty, when do you recommend adjusting valves? Can you do it yourself at home? Well, you can if you want to, but most cars you don't need to adjust the valves anymore. They have hydraulic lifters in them, and they automatically adjust themselves. American cars have been that way for decades and decades. I had a 70 Ford Maverick, 1970. It had hydraulic valve lifters in them. I did have to change the lifters because it was a Ford and the damn things kept breaking all the time, but... Let's say you got a Honda. A lot of the Hondas, the older ones, up until just a few years ago, had manually adjusted valves. You can do it yourself if you want to learn. It can be done. It takes time. Now, on the other hand, let's say you got a Toyota that's got the shims. The cams are on the top, and there's no adjustment. The shims push right against the cams. The shims have to be measured, then taken apart, then buy whatever shim will make the difference between how far off it is. That I wouldn't ever advise doing, because you got to have all these shims, sets of shims. The dealers often don't even have them in stock. You have your engine taken apart, you can't drive it. In that case, no. But on the other hand, I've got Toyotas with 300,000 miles. The valves were never touched, and they're still within specs because those stainless steel shims basically can last forever if you change the oil regularly. Jason Barney says, I got an 09 Lancer code P0420. Can an exhaust leak cause that code? Well, it certainly can cause that code. If you have an exhaust leak, that allows excess oxygen to get into the exhaust system. Your oxygen sensors measure the amount of residual oxygen, and that's to set your fuel ratio, air-fuel ratio of your engine. So, if you have too much oxygen being sucked in through the exhaust leak, then you will get a false reading, and it can give it inefficient catalytic converter code, the P0420, because it's all confused. And I've seen that. You know, I've seen people that they got it and they, well, put a catalytic converter on. They still have the code, and then they bring it to me after somebody else messed it up. And I say, well, you got an exhaust leak. Let's fix the exhaust leak, and then the code goes away. They didn't need the catalytic converter. Theoretically, catalytic converters last forever if you don't burn oil in your engine and you take care and buy good gas. Generally, the catalytic converters will last forever. They don't really wear out on their own. They wear out to something else. The only ones that ever really wore out were poorly made ones, like a lot of Volvos. You'd hear them rattle. You start up and you hear, rah, 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 and then they're physically breaking down inside because they were built poorly. In that case, yeah, you got to replace it. But if it's not rattling, a lot of times you got an exhaust leak, that's the problem. It's causing that code. It's not the converter itself. Kishore says, Scotty, what happens if you wash your engine with high-pressure water? If you don't wash it, will a dirty engine work poorly? You never want to use high-pressure water on modern cars. There's too many electronics, too much crap can go on. Right? Engines, as they age, you get a little grease, oil that kind of gets on stuff. It hurts nothing. The only time it hurts something is if you got a leak that's bad enough that it's dripping and make it to the ground. You got to see where it's dripping. Now, if on its way from the engine to the ground, it gets on the alternator, of course, it will short the alternator out. If it gets on the starter, the oil will short the starter out, and then you'd have to fix the oil leak and the starter. But just normal grime doesn't affect anything on the running of a car. You don't have a picnic under the hood of your car. Who cares if it's not whistle clean? It doesn't affect anything. You got a leak that's dripping, yeah, you got to fix it now. And then you want to clean all the stuff off. And I advise having a professional do it, because you could spray all kinds of electronic stuff. They know what to avoid. They'll cover it up with plastic bags and stuff so they won't ruin anything. But if it's not dripping on the ground, you're not really losing anything, don't even worry about it. Doesn't matter. Haji says, if a girl drives a Fiat, is she safe to marry? In the United States, Fiats, they failed before. Fiat bought Chrysler, they brought them back. They're failing again. Now, you can always teach people things. You shouldn't drive that car. It's not a smart move. They don't last. Now, they're zippy and fun to drive around in. So, I mean, hey, you always have to give somebody an allowance for it. They didn't know that they aren't very well-built cars and they're going to fall apart. Hey, she's driving a Fiat around. She's not a gold digger, because Fiats are relatively cheap cars, you know? Now, if she was driving an Alfa Romeo, the fancy version that Fiat owns, yeah, that's another story. But Fiats are just, tonneau box cars, the ones they sold in the United States. And generally, you don't have to worry about her driving it all that long, because most of them fall apart pretty quickly. Now, if she buys another one, yeah, that might make you change your mind about the whole thing. Sean says, I got an 09 Equinox. It overheats. I replaced the thermostat water pump and used Blow Devil Sealer. It's still overheating. All right, well, you got to analyze. You can watch my video, Fixing an Overheating Car Engine, Scott. It'd show you every every step that you can possibly see what could be wrong. Now, you use Blue Devil, that's a sealer. Sealers might work, they might not, and some of them will clog it up and make the overheating even worse. I mean, hey, you could have a bad radiator. You could have a blowing head gasket. The first thing you'd start with this, check it for blown head gaskets. You either pay a mechanic like me or real easy, you can go to Amazon, you can buy a block leak test thing for like $40. It's a test tube, goes in the radiator. When you take the radiator cap off when it's cold, you pour the blue fluid in to the line, start it up, and watch it. And if the blue fluid turns yellow, you got at least the blown head gasket. You're going to have to tear the engine apart. That means the blue sealer didn't work. They can't work all that well. There's a lot of compression pressure inside an engine. But don't just think you need that. Test first. Maybe it's just a clogged radiator. You can test for the head gasket blown first. And if it is blown, then do you really want to take an Equinox engine apart? Those things are kind of junky engines. Chance that somebody's going to rebuild it right, and they don't. A lot of times it's better just get another vehicle. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.